activity affects us and why we should care. And then we're going to move on to now how technology is affecting us and the businesses around. Mr. Lewis Ward is a research director at International Data Corporation, whose coverage area includes XR hardware, interactive 3D software for XR headsets, and video game hardware and software. In terms of XR hardware and software, his purview includes commercial and consumer virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and extended reality. He also focuses on gaming, where his purview includes video game console hardwares, popular gaming accessories, and console, personal computers, and mobile games and their uses. His coverage also includes the tools and platforms that developers rely on to build and support real-time interactive 3D apps, games, and metaverse experiences that are accessed on XR and flat-screen hardware. Mr. Ward has been with IDC for over 20 years. He joined as a senior research analyst and is now a research director at the same organization. Without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Ward here and let us enjoy his immersive presentation on technology and how it is going to disrupt the future for businesses as well as people around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chut. Hopefully this is going to work. Sometimes technology does not cooperate. So yeah, I'm seeing it there, but it's, I guess I'm seeing some builds here. Although I'm not getting the build, sorry, with the clicker here. Can you go back to the title screen by any chance, or I guess I'm having the same issue as the previous speaker, perhaps. But yes, my name is Lewis Ward, Director of XR hardware, gaming, and interactive 3D software. So it's kind of a mixture of both video game stuff, which is a lot of consumer-focused things. But if you look at game engines like Unity and Unreal, they're also increasingly being used by enterprises to build all sorts of 3D apps. So you're seeing it applied to movies and to animated shows, doing various kinds of custom software to solve real business problems that are out there. So it's interesting to me that that same idea of 3D internet stuff is going to probably come to a website near you very soon in the next several years. So can I build on this one? I'm not sure the clicker's going to work yet. Do you have a separate clicker? Yeah, it's on, but. Down instead of up. Oh, down instead of up. Did I do that wrong? Okay, thank you. Great. So the agenda is what is XR and why does it matter to college kids, but also the rest of us. I'll talk about 2 ways of learning about Vikings. It involves a vacation that we had to Northern Europe where I both studied Vikings, let's say a traditional way, and then used XR to do the same thing. And we'll talk about some of the differences there and maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages of doing it in XR. And then we'll end up with some talk about the shortcomings of XR, some of its strengths and some of its potential weaknesses. So what is XR? XR is the X really in our describing of it is not a term in and of itself. It's standing for 4 different things. Maybe this one's better. No, I'll just use the handheld as well. So it stands for virtual reality, mixed reality, extended reality, and augmented reality. 4 kind of separate technologies, but definitely interrelated. So you may have seen devices like the MetaQuest 2 or MetaQuest 3. So we would define MetaQuest 2 as a VR headset. Yes, there are cameras where you can see black and white images, but generally speaking, VR is going to occlude your view, and you're simply going to be seeing a virtual representation of whatever entertainment experience you're in or other kind of app. Sony also has PSVR 2. I'm going to try a demo with PSVR 2 as well, and that's what we consider also virtual reality. Mixed reality has color cameras, so in that one, like MetaQuest 3 is a good example. ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, also is into this with Pico, so you might have tried that headset as well. But these use cameras to recreate the world around you in 3D, and then you can place objects into that environment and interact with those objects. The third one, extended reality, they don't do 3D. They're more like traditional glasses, like you would have today, except that they can display some sort of visual data inside it. So there are smart glasses which are different, that do not do visual data, but you might be able to answer a phone call, things like that on it. Those don't qualify in our definition of extended reality. You've got to be able to do some 3D data with it. Examples here are X-Real, Air 2, Roku also has Max, but there are many other companies involved in that space. And then last is augmented reality, where again, you're gonna see through the visor into the real world, but then the digital objects are gonna be placed in that environment and you can manipulate them and pick them up, move them around, interact with them. So in segments 2 and 4, mixed reality and augmented reality, they usually have inside-out tracking, which means it's aware of where you are. So when I move back, it's going to understand where I am in relation to the rest of the things in the room. And it has technology called SLAM, simultaneous lighting and mapping. And what that means is it understands that there's a desk here, where the ground is, where that chair is. And so when I put an object, a digital object on that chair, it's gonna stay there and I can rotate around it, manipulate it. And when I drop it back down, it's gonna know there's a chair there. So the SLAM technology is really involved in segments 2 and 4, but not in 3. And you don't really need it for VR either, traditional VR. In terms of the number of shipments, we have it at about 7 million, with VR leading the way in 2023, and kind of in descending order there down to on the order of 60,000 augmented reality glasses sold to consumers and businesses. So why does it matter? That's a good question. If there are only about 7 million units shipped last year, why should we care about it, right? There were 48 million game consoles sold last year, 75 million cars, 1.16 billion smartphones shipped. So why should we be interested in this topic? And I will answer that 3 different ways, but let me start by asking, I guess, the students and faculty, can I get a show of hands of any of you who have ever used one of those 4 technologies I mentioned? So very high. I'm guessing 50%-ish. Can you raise your hand again if you've done it since the start of this summer? So since June, July, if you've done it on a device you own in your household, not a friend's. So yeah, I'd say maybe 20%, something like that, which is not too unusual from what I'm seeing in this age group. So I'll answer the question as to why it matters 3 different ways. So to borrow a catchphrase from the school, small numbers, big impact. So one of the things that I think matters is that the 7 million shipments that I talked about is not illustrative of the total install base, because they've been coming out slowly since the 2010s, and there's probably about 35 million of these devices. So first of all, there's a lot more than 7 million in use today because they've been out for a while. A second factor is that younger demographics have been disproportionately attracted to this stuff. So the Gen Z coming up generation is doing it more than older Americans. So I would argue that over time, the activity that you folks have done, and maybe the generation younger than you, is gonna be doing it more than you. So 10 years from now, you're probably gonna see a lot more of this than you are today, simply because of the way folks have interacted, and younger people in particular have interacted with it. So I cite some survey data here, but basically in the 3rd quarter of last year in the US among gaming households, so that was the survey base, there was, I think I have a couple stats there. So in 13 to 24-year-old age group, about 14% of Americans fit in that, but 26% of our XR sample fit into that age group. We also found that African Americans overrepresented, but most minority groups overrepresented in terms of the share of the user base. We also found users to be skewing male and also relatively wealthy, so 2 other demographic things that we call out. So I would suggest that over time, again, the younger generation is going to be doing more of this, and so we're likely to see more of that over the next few years. It's also, I would argue, part of an evolving continuum of kind of more intuitive human interaction with computers, right? So we started with, mice and keyboards in the 60s, and then game controllers came out, maybe a little more intuitive way to move around. Then you got to touch screens, invented in the 1990s. The iPhone exploded in 2008, 2009. And then XR has really only come about in the past decade, where you've got like hand controllers or literally using your fingers to manipulate stuff, a much more intuitive way to interact with objects and the world around you and the way people interact with each other. So I'd argue that, this is part of a continuum of the computers coming to us and getting more like we like to do things rather than the other way around where you've got to learn a UI in order to use something. So I think that that's part of that continuation, and it will continue to be the case. And I also think that the medium of the message, an old, I guess 1960s, 1970s saying about TV and the impact that the fact that it's coming through that square box, and that's the medium, says something about the message that they're conveying to you. And I would argue that XR is kind of part of that. When you're interacting with stuff in XR, it impacts what you're gonna learn about it, your experience of what it is to do that. And therefore, the means by which you're accessing information informs you something about that type of information that you're accessing. So I think that that's an important trend that probably will continue. And oh, by the way, if you've done, how about a show of hands, how many people have done AR filters on their phone or Snapchat or something like that? So AR should be considered part of a spectrum where you're already doing it on 2D devices. Or Pokemon Go. Are there any Pokemon Go players out here? One, two, maybe. So that's another very popular AR game that you can do on your smartphone today. Will give you a sense of what AR is all about. And the last person there is like looking at an IT problem on a server. She's circling something that's not going right with it, and you can basically, somebody else can come in and fix it. They'll know what it is that she's looking at. And so you're doing it on a 2D screen now. So I'd argue that it's not even 35 million, it's more like hundreds of millions of people are already on like a curve of what augmented reality is, with doing it in a full-blown headset or a mixed reality headset, kind of the top end of the spectrum of what's possible today. I'll get more into this, but I also think that XR will disrupt, or has the potential to disrupt, some things in the world today that you may care a lot about, but because it's kind of coming on, even if you don't care about XR or don't ever want to do it, which some people say they don't want anything to do with it, that it may begin impacting things you do care about because, again, the usage profile will probably come up. So just as the internet revolution kind of disrupted, magazines and newspapers and things like that, how you get your music digitally rather than through CDs, which I have at home, I think that it has the potential to not only keep disrupting those things in a digital way, but it also could disrupt the digital disruptors. In other words, we've got entrenched digital behaviors now, entrenched digital processes, and I think there's an opportunity for XR to start reinventing some of those ways of doing things and therefore disrupt the disruptors, if you will. So some quick hits on forecasts for hardware. So this is starting with mixed reality. We have it going from about 5 million to over 20 million by 2028, most of it consumer-oriented. Something that kind of reignited interest in mixed reality earlier this year was Apple's Vision Pro headset. Has anybody ever tried that one? Nobody? Maybe one person has tried that one. So that is a mixed reality headset, right? It's again included, but it's doing a digital representation with 3D color cameras. One of these streamers put it on his face and started skateboarding in New York City on it. I do not recommend skateboarding with a $3,500 computer strapped to your face. There are lag issues. A little bump, you're gonna be out a lot of money, so don't be that guy. In terms of VR, we actually have this going down. So the PSVR 2, sorry Sony, and Quest 2, those shipments are falling, and you should think about mixed reality as supplanting virtual reality as we have known it. That the future use cases are probably going to be, yes, they can go fully occluded if you want to do VR, but because they've got color cameras and you can have the real world represented reasonably well, and you can interact with those objects, we think those use cases will proliferate and basically almost kill demand for virtual reality headsets as we've traditionally known them. Which again, in our definition, black and white cameras or grayscale cameras where you kind of touch it and you can briefly see through to the real world is what that is. And we think the ability to see through to the real world with color cameras is gonna become the norm. Again, consumers, the vast majority of those shipments being purchased. So extended reality, X-Real 2 here, Rocket Max, another example with a guy who's looks very cool with those glasses on. Again, these are gonna show 2D data, maybe your smartphone screen, maybe a PC screen, maybe you can answer a phone call, you can do some very simple things, but you're not gonna be able to interact much with the world around them. And when you turn your head, that digital thing you're seeing will shift with you. You won't be able to put it in location because it doesn't have inside-out tracking or SLAM. That means it's lighter, the less expensive, but in some ways they don't look as bulky and they're not as heavy. You can put them on your head for longer. Meta's reality, Meta has Ray-Bans out now. We consider those smart glasses, not extended reality glasses, because they don't do visuals. But this is where Meta wants to go. I think over time, Meta intends to get more into extended reality, where you begin to do Facebook and Instagram and all the other things digitally through headsets, which we haven't seen yet. I'm actually going to Connect next week. Maybe I'll learn something more there. But most of those, again, going to 9 million units, are going for consumers. And lastly, AR, still mostly consumer in terms of who's buying them. These are shipments again, but much smaller numbers, less than 1 million, I believe. Yeah, even by 2028, we have around 650,000, I believe. And again, Magic Leap 2 is an example, but there are others. So when you put it all together, all the headsets across those 4 categories that we talked about, we have about 36% growth. Up to 32 million, up from, again, less than 7 million this year by 2028. So that's like 4x growth. So I think it's fair to say, at least in our estimation of what the market's going to do, that you're going to see a lot more of that hardware around you in both a consumer and a business context. And in terms of spending on it, all the hardware spending, all the software spending, all the service spending, we believe that'll grow at about a 32% CAGR to well over $50 billion, right? So it becomes a rather significant part of the market in terms of tripling revenue spending, or if not more. And most of that is commercial, actually. So unlike the headsets, which are mostly bought by consumers, we think that most of the spending will be done by enterprises, and that's because they have to deal with systems integration, they have to buy other kinds of software, they have to build custom applications, which are not easy to build, and they're very expensive to build. They have to buy some other software to make it all work together nicely, and therefore the companies that want to do this, that are solving very specific problems that they have in their respective markets, need to spend a lot more money, because it's not simple. A lot of it's not off the shelf today. It's a pretty young market, and therefore the enterprises may have to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, to really get to a solution they want to. Meta, one of my colleagues went to a Meta event this summer. They announced they'd hit $2 billion spent, over 500 apps and games in their storefront. About 1 in 12 of those application developer studios basically has generated more than $10 million, so the studios are beginning to see returns on that investment. And over 100 of the apps of those 500 are now in mixed reality, meaning it's using the video cameras to kind of place things around rather than doing pure VR, which Meta, again, was historically leading with devices like Quest 2. So that is kind of an overview of what XR is and where we think it's going to go. Let me demonstrate kind of an example of real-world learning versus XR-based learning, and I'll do that by way of a vacation that we took last month that involved a trip to Norway. I'll preface it by saying my wife is a big Assassin's Creed Valhalla fan, so she was into Vikings well before we got there, but when we got to Oslo, she wanted to go see some Vikings in real life and learn about them in real life, so we went to 2 places, but this is the first one we went to. So it's a museum, they've got a Viking exhibit. You're gonna see, let me see, yeah. So you can see these helmets that they've dug up. You can read descriptions of them. You can look at, very ornately done jewelry that they've found. I think in the middle there in the silver is like a Thor's hammer, incredibly detailed stuff. You can read descriptions of what it all is. This is actually from the Middle Ages when Christianity started coming through Norway and the Viking region between the year 1000 and 1300. They were slowly converted to Christianity. This is actually a vessel that a priest would use to wash their hands. So they kind of got into something which I hadn't really thought about, which is where did the Vikings go? What became of them? So in the same museum, they had these staved churches. These are the church doors that were rescued from churches that were falling down. Very ornately carved wood. They love their wooden churches up there. But interwoven into this kind of Norse view of the church door are, heroes from Norse mythology. So there'll be characters from Norse mythology woven into the doors of these old churches. So there was a long transition phase between, the Norse gods like Thor and whatnot into Christianity. They painted the Old Testament on these wooden churches' roofs and so forth. But at the end of the day, what most visitors are there for is to see the Viking swords, think about how they raided and did their thing, went down into the UK, went down into, all the way to France, I think into Mediterranean, and some people would argue they were the first Europeans to set foot on the American continent, although I believe that's still controversial. And that the other thing there, that the big pillar kind of in the middle is, it's like a runestone that they put on the edge of one of their Viking boats. So there's like runes on it. Anyway, you can get close. You can learn about, get a sense of what it is. And I would equate this roughly to traditional classroom-based learning, right? Go reading a book, something you could find on the internet, stuff you could do on your own to get a sense of what it's like to be a Viking and what the people went through at that time. The other thing we did in Oslo was visited this Viking planet, which bills itself as a digital Viking experience, I believe it is. So they say, what do they say? Yeah, digital Viking experience. So, or museum, digital Viking museum. And there they have like 270-degree movies. So they hired actors and they take you through village life. They'll show you what it's like. It's blasting sound. They go on a raid together. They'll show the same kind of jewelry that they showed at the museum, but then scanned, and you can kind of zoom in, zoom out, do 360 degrees and switch between them. That's my daughter there. They can do holograms, so you could select about 30 different village elder types, and you could select one in about 11 different languages, and they'd come out and talk to you for a few minutes about what their life was like, what they're doing, and then disappear back into the mist. They also had a digital representation of a museum which is closed for renovation. So there's two Viking museums. One is another physical one where they have some Viking longboats, one of their claim to fame. But before it closed, they went in with 360-degree cameras and they basically, created a 3D representation of it. And through that touchscreen, you can move around the different, areas of the museum and read the exhibit notes and things like that. So they have a representation of the longboat. You can kind of get some sense of the museum as well as what the Viking experience is like, again, done through a computer, through in this case, VR, not a VR camera, but a regular camera, but they stitch it together to give you a 360-degree sense of it that's pretty detailed. And it made me think when I went on the Westminster College site that you guys have a virtual tour, and I'll come back to that, but in some ways, it reminded me of that experience. My daughter, anyway, we mentioned, Dr. Seaton talked about the Northern Lights, and I guess I could run this animation. There is a short animation, but anyway, she waves a sword around, but basically you could throw up different backgrounds with the Northern Lights behind you and play out your inner Viking. I did my own raid, a lot of fun. They also have a game called Ferd, so here was full-on VR. So they had about 4 of these set up for about 20 minutes. You could spend $20 to go in and do a Vive. That's a Vive headset with a computer up top. You can see a little blue light on. This game is actually available on Steam. So if you're into VR, you can go get this game for $20 on Steam. You're in a longboat. You've got, your archery. You're going on a raid at the end of the day. And so that game, you don't have to go to Oslo to try that one out. But their main thing was about 40 seats, so much smaller than this auditorium, where they had a VR headset. I believe those are HP reverbs, computer on the side, as you can see. They got rumble built into the seats, and you go on a raid. So again, you're in a longboat. You don't have the hand controllers, so you are a seated experience, but you can certainly look around and get a sense of, again, you start off in this raid, so you're paddling through some rivers, and you're talk to some of your colleagues, or at least they're talking about what's going on. And then it starts to get hectic with the adversaries seeing who you are, and arrows go back and forth, and it gets hectic. But that was the main VR type experience that they had. So they would, mill through people every 20 minutes or so and give you a sense of what it's like. And so that is a second way of learning about Vikings, right? This is a second way to experience what it was like and kind of get more into the Viking mindset. So I'm going to ask you to think about what you think the differences are between traditional classroom-based learning and learning in XR, or experiencing something in XR. But for now, I'm going to try to do a short UI. For those that haven't seen the UI, I'm going to try to do a demo here. So if our IT friends can maybe switch us over, I will try to play a little bit of Call of the Mountain, a kind of a game that came out, I believe, in early 2023, early last year. and do a demo of what it's like to, to navigate through that world. So let me know you're good to go. Okay. Turn this off. Okay, I'll stop there. I too complete. Yeah, if you can switch me back, let me know. Awesome. So maybe think about how that's different than learning something by reading a book or whatever. Obviously, this is a game, but you can imagine that type of experience and what it may be to do that. So maybe give some thought as to the strengths and weaknesses of a UI. And that UI, if you saw my hand, you can open it and it kind of recognizes when I touch it and touch buttons like that. You can do all 5 fingers. So depending on the UI, you can manipulate things a wide variety of ways with the software. Basically, pretty fun game that I actually didn't finish. I have a save problem with it, talk about a glitch. Let me know when you guys can go back to the main prezo. But why don't I, while they're doing that, basically I would like to ask the folks, students, if I may, 3 questions. One is about if you did the virtual tour and you think it had some strengths and weaknesses, now that you've seen the actual campus, I think one of the folks here is going to bring around a microphone. So I have 3 questions. One, if you took the virtual tour and you thought it was strong or weak, either one is fine. I promise you won't get in any trouble. But when you experienced it yourself and you saw something really good about it that did very well, or something that you didn't find to be accurate once you actually did it, I'd like to know what that is. Secondly, whether you've done XR or not, have you thought about a strength? Have what I've presented, has it given you a sense of what it's good at, what it would be well suited to do? And third, if you think it has problems, if you think it's not going to work, if you have a negative opinion about how it's going to be able to do X, Y, or Z, maybe come up and give us 30 seconds on why you think it's got maybe ethical issues or technical issues or whatever it may be. So can I ask for a few volunteers to answer any one of those 3 questions? We got one.
All right. My name is Dalen. I was going to answer your second question.
Okay.
So, can you relay the question again?
So the second one was strengths of XR, like something you can imagine in the real world, whether it's learning or some other use case where doing it that way would be advantageous relative to, say, doing it in a classroom. Not that there's anything wrong with classrooms at all, just saying that it's a different way of learning, a different way of experiencing something, and if you have an idea about what that strength may be, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, so one thing I can say about XR and stuff like that, it helps with a lot of hands-on learning.
Yep.
An example I could give is my friend's dad. He does like pilot training.
Yeah.
And so he do that like hands-on and have to touch all the buttons and make sure you're doing everything right in the game, because it replicates real life, and everything you do in the game is something you'll do in person. And so that's an example. And another example I could give is like, I'm not too sure like how true this is, but I've seen something like doctors, they'll do stuff in like virtual reality and stuff like that, like surgeries and stuff like that, and it'll give them a more perspective of doing it there so they can relate it to real life.
Absolutely, both awesome examples, great job. Yeah, I think there's an FAA training for certain helicopters that have both been approved in the US and Europe, where they have been FAA certified, which is a big deal. It means you can get your certification using an XR headset rather than going to these giant rooms which cost millions of dollars to make. That's a huge cost savings and huge ease of use savings. You gotta buy the rig, there's a physical rig, so it's not quite as easy as just buying an XR headset. Anybody else? Please.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a few bad things that I've noticed about XR.
Okay.
Well, I have a VR headset myself, and I play quite a few games, and I find myself sitting there for 30 minutes beating on a lifeless body.
Ooh.
For no reason at all. So,
The physics.
yeah, I find it can be a little bit, bad for children, because if a child gets their hands on it and they learn about violence like this, and it can be applicable to real life really easily. So
your ethical concern, if I don't put words in your mouth, but is that if kids do it too much, they may actually not understand the difference between the real world and the virtual world and may start thinking it's okay to do that.
yes, exactly. But
Okay.
also, I would like to point out that there's quite a few things that people can do in VR in substitute to doing inside real life.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I know there's a lot of like gambling in real
Okay.
life, and
There
that
is.
can be a bad thing sometimes,
Yes.
people. But then people can go online on a VR headset and
Yeah.
gamble and not use real money. in a sense. So it's not, not wasting all their money gambling in
Okay.
real life.
Okay, so maybe it's actually good. I thought you were going to say it was worse because it's in VR, but maybe not true. So another, maybe a good thing that they're not wasting real money, they're wasting virtual money. Any other comments about strengths, weaknesses, or again, the virtual tour that I think the school had? Did anybody do the virtual tour? That you saw the virtual tour before you actually came here? And that was your first experience of the campus? A couple people? Even some staff? Yeah. Anybody else other comments on that one as to what was good or bad about it?
I didn't do the
Oh.
virtual tour,
Yeah.
but
Okay, sorry.
from an artist perspective,
Yeah.
I'd say that VR gives us a lot more mediums that we can use.
Okay.
I've seen a lot of people create like statues in VR and
Right.
such. I think that would be a really good thing to expand upon.
Yeah, I know I've followed a few people on X/Twitter that do some amazing artwork in that 3D space, and they almost do like ballet while they're making it. It's kind of crazy to see, but it can be really beautiful and a new way to experience art for sure. Any other last comments? No? Okay. I think I will go on. If you can keep displaying that down below, maybe I'll go on while you're, I guess, trying to get that up, or maybe you got it up there. Yeah, okay. So what are some differences here, right? How is it different? So it's about doing, not watching or listening or reading about what other people have done. I think that's one of the big things. I would say it's more like hands-on lab work. I think one of your classmates said that already. It can involve multiple human senses. So instead of just visual or audio or whatever it may be, it can do, it can be both audio and visual and tactic. You couldn't really feel it, but they have sensors in there, haptics in there that will give you a vibration. So there's a little bit of a touch thing involved in that. Whole body movement, so that kind of getting that whole body going is a little bit different than classroom-based learning. It's often story-based. So something that you can do in XR is if you've got a narrative structure or learning structure, you can go down the path and people can choose, the users can choose A, B, or C, and then depending on what they do at A, B, and C might cause D, E, or F to happen, right? So that instead of learning through a traditional set linear process, you can force them to do live learning on their own, right? Try to apply what they've learned in real time to solve a real problem. And I think that's something of a different way to learn about how to solve problems. Lastly, everything can be captured and judged, right? So if you want to, and the enterprise wanted to, they could capture everything you're doing in XR, and that could be used for good or bad. What happens to that data? Do you own it? Does it, does somebody else own that or have access to it? All those problems kind of come along with it. Also, I think, in some cases, and maybe you saw it with the demo, even at the Viking Museum, it can kind of push the boundaries to make the content engaging, but it may not be accurate. In other words, if you're looking for facts or studying the sun, if you're doing it in XR, they might try to push the colors too much, or they might try to make it too fun, and you may not learn as much simply because they're trying to take advantage of the UI, and that can be distorting as to what reality is about. It's also focused on individual actions, so something that I've seen is that, and I think it's getting better, but I think live group learning, if you're learning among your peers, that can be awesome, better than in XR. And even in some of the XR experiences I've seen, getting beyond about 16 people in the headset at the same time is very technically tough. So I think there's a challenge there in terms of if you're doing large group-based learning, that doing it in real life is actually better. And I would argue one of the main advantages is not that it's better than real life learning, it's that it's half as good as real, hands-on learning would be, but at maybe 10 or 20 or 30% of the cost. And so the real sweet spot is, when do you want to do hands-on based learning, but getting everybody physically in the same room to do it is not cost effective or not time effective. Sometimes there's critical issues around, you gotta get it done soon, and it's very difficult to do that. So we'll wrap this up with discussions of shortcomings, strengths, and the disruptive potential of XR. So shortcomings, you got to buy it, right? So one of the issues is that you do have to buy a specific piece of hardware if you're doing it in a headset, and I think those can be expensive, and supporting it over time can also be expensive. So it's not going to be accessible to everybody. It's not like a technology where you can push out an app on the internet and 100 people can be using it in 3 days. It's not that. And so changing entrenched behavior plus the cost means it's hard to get up and going. It doesn't scale well. So like I said, everybody who doesn't have the headset can't really do it, although some of the AR kind of add-ons that are being done where you can access it on a 2D screen, a smartphone or tablet computer, in addition to doing in the headset, is trying to solve that issue. But by and large, without the headset, you can't do it, and therefore it doesn't scale. And that means there's kind of a chicken or the egg growth problem. So this tech has been around for a decade, and we're only shipping 7 million units a year, and that's not a great growth curve, right? Even though we're saying it will grow, it's kind of got into a chicken or the egg problem where there's not enough great software because the install base is not large, and then users don't want to buy it because there's not enough software. And so you get into kind of a problem that a lot of tech falls into, which is how useful really is this to me, and is the expense worth it? The development stacks aren't really standardized. So there are some standards like OpenXR that has APIs and WebXR. So you can do some things that are standardized, but by and large, a lot of what's being done is proprietary. Meta's got their approach, Google's got their approach, Sony's got their approach, and they've got their own set of tools and they got their own UI things. So getting different organizations that try to play nicely together and experience something together is very difficult, very expensive, and goes back to that cost issue I talked about. The software can be glitchy. The UI systems can be terrible. You can try to get in there and you just don't understand how to do the UI, and so you give it up. Not everyone can do it. So some folks don't have 2 great working eyes, or maybe you need 2 controllers to do something, but you've lost an arm or can't do something. So a significant share of the population, no matter how great your solution is not going to be able to put on that headset and do the interactions you want them to do. So what does that cause? What downstream effects flow from that? Significant users get motion sick. So I will do this sometimes in a game that's got you flipping around and doing all these cool things that you might do in a video game. Doing that in XR is extremely disorienting. I start sweating after about 10 minutes in an XR experience like that and can't do it for more than like 20. Usage can be tracked. So like I said, what happens when your body and eye movements are tracked for advertising purposes or whatever, what's going to happen to that data, I think is another concern. Gen AI is a big topic. We won't get into generative artificial intelligence, but that's already impacting XR content. All those issues will come through, and maybe some of those are even worse when somebody's trolling you 3 inches from your face in XR as to being savaged on Twitter or something. It might be different and may have larger issues to deal with. So turning from the weaknesses to potential strengths and areas of disruption, I've got some survey data here from the US in the 3rd quarter of 2023. The top 4 use cases, one was video late last year, a second one was games, third was doing collaborative spaces, so there's a lot of different apps that fall into this category, but socializing or collaborating with friends or colleagues or whatever it may be is the third use case, and then surfing the web and basically shopping, using it as a big web browser, except you're doing it in a VR headset, came in number 4. But by and large, the main use cases for consumers have been playing games and watching video content. Some of it 3D, but some of it just throwing up like an IMAX screen on these headsets. If you add in fitness apps, so there are a bunch of different apps that you can do boxing. Beat Saber is a good example, but there are games that really get you, they've emphasized the physical motion part of VR in particular. Then the penetration rate goes from the 50s to just under, I think, videos. But some years, gaming plus fitness type apps come in well ahead of videos. But games are the clear number 1 by revenue. So we had about 1.6 billion last year in terms of consumer spending. And some metaverse apps are education friendly. So some of these apps are, yes, you're getting together with your friends in XR or even some 2D screens that you can bring in and play along with VR chat, things like that. But some of them, like Horizon Worlds from Meta, which hasn't gotten great marks, but they're trying to do education-based things in XR, and they're really trying to ramp up the idea that this isn't just for consumers and people getting together and socializing, but you can use it as an instructive or learning environment and create, education there. And again, that could be marginally disruptive, right? So the disruptions here are, do you need to go to physical gym? Does everybody, want to spend it on take the time and money to have a gym membership or have a personal trainer if you can do it in XR at a fraction of the cost and stay at home. I think that's one of the potential disruptions to think about. And for education, again, the in-classroom stuff, maybe some trade schools might be affected, again, present company accepted, but training and so forth, I think is going to be another sweet space for consumer XR use cases. A few others, location-based XR has kind of come back since the pandemic. So in St. Louis, there's a place called Sandbox VR, I believe it's called, and it's like a chain, but you put on sensors so it knows where your body is. You get together with friends, you go to a location, and you're all, blasting aliens and stuff like that, and there's a bunch of different experiences there. Maybe you've done it, but you could imagine how this might not be disruptive to family entertainment centers, amusement parks. They are, I believe, one of the companies I talked to or briefed with is doing AR at Disney World. So you put on an AR headset and you're interacting with stuff down there. So it's beginning, you're starting to see it in the museum, my example in Oslo, you're beginning to see these things filter into in-places experiences. And I think that we'll probably continue to see that. Not really disruptive, probably more additive. Concerts in XR. So Enter the Hottyverse was a hot thing, or maybe it wasn't huge, but there was a partnership with Amaze VR where Megan Thee Stallion did something in 2022. Deadmau5 did something earlier this year with a different company. I went to an NBA game where they were showing off NBA games in a VR headset, but I was at the game, but they were showing off where the cameras are. You could do this sort of thing, and to my mind, you think about pay-per-view things or how some people buy movies now, and when they come out, you can basically get it right at home for 20 or 30 bucks, so you pay extra, but you get it right away, or a pay-per-view. I can imagine more things coming down the pipe where a certain share of, instead of going to a physical place or a sports arena, a certain segment of the population will stay at home and experience it through XR in some way. Another example are these, we would call them ER glasses, but I think it was called X-Ray is the company, and their glasses are called AR1. It transcribes conversations that you have in real time when you're wearing them. So if you're deaf or hearing impaired, it will say it has microphones on it, and it will sense what those people are saying in like 75 languages, and it will give you a readout of what they're saying to you, and you can interact back to them however you want to. But might this disrupt at least some need for hearing aids or something at the margins where this sort of approach may be better than what we're traditionally doing? I think that's a possibility. Longer term, I think a bigger disruption to start thinking about is disrupting smartphones. So this is, I think, where Meta wants to go. So some of the, they're not doing it yet. Like I talked about those smart glasses earlier, those Meta Ray-Bans, whereas X-Real is like on top of the ER space right now. But I think Meta's investing heavily here, and they see an opportunity to disrupt smartphones. So instead of buying a smartphone, right now, X-Real has something called the Beam Pro. This one is simply doing Wi-Fi, but a 5G version is coming before the end of this year. It looks like a smartphone, it's not a smartphone. You can't do cell phone calls on it, but you can access Google Play, you can access all the apps you have. It'll throw it up on that device, and you can interact with it through the device. You can do it wirelessly, you don't have to have it plugged in like that. But basically, you could do, what percentage of the stuff you want to do on your smartphone could you do through that interaction mechanism of a pair of glasses and a device like that? They cost about the same as a new iPhone today. And once you add 5G, you can start to do this, do video calls. What do you need a cell tower for at all if what you want to do is just use the data network to do this stuff socially? So I think there's a real possibility. Like I said, there was 1.16 billion smartphones sold last year. If 3% of that is carved off by the 2030s, and I'm not making this forecast, we only do 5-year forecasts, but if 3% of people, as this technology gets better, decide to opt for that combination, ER glasses with a smartphone, that's 35 million headsets shipped. I think this is where Meta's thinking about the disruption possibility, and I would think Google's headed here too. Google's invested in this stuff too. The other big disruption, again, more forward-leaning, not something I'm forecasting in any precise way today, is looking at native ads. So today, if you look at UEFN, if any of you play Fortnite, it's kind of fractured into a bunch of different experiences. One of the top 6 experiences as of earlier this year, as of June, was Lego Fortnite. So they partnered with Lego. The team from Epic actually built it, and it is number 6 on the hours of use, or the concurrent users. And so we're talking hundreds of thousands of people playing Lego maps. That is a native ad as far as I'm concerned. It is a non-endemic brand who has partnered with a game development company, and now you're experiencing it, not in XR, but you're seeing a native ad, or you're going around this Lego environment that they've made for you. A better example may be what's going on in Roblox, and that is already available in XR. You can do Roblox in XR today, so this is actually live. But a top 5 revenue generating experience that they have there, this, what is it, toilet tower defense. So this is made by an edge of the network, group, right? A small studio who built an experience on Roblox, a top 3 by revenue, and they're also top 5 by visitors as of the first half of 2024, according to Spaceport XYZ, who I partnered with to get this data. But they partnered with a machinima brand called Skibbity Toilet. Anybody know what Skibbity Toilet is? They're in there, so they're already there. So this is a native ad showing up in Roblox that you could do in VR today. And what I'm suggesting is the 3D internet's coming. So we're all experiencing it in 2D. Huge, big companies are investing in how are we gonna make the internet 3D. That's the next wave of it. So you may not like the term metaverse, and I know Meta kind of gave it a bad name, quite frankly, but the 3D internet's coming, and how you think about native ads being integrated into that, or native experiences are gonna be a big part of that. So on the business front, I've got some use cases here, but a lot of it's about meetings and virtual collaboration. I won't go through all the details since I think I'm short on time, but at the end of the day, it's about real life, not replacing real life training, but certainly doing similar things in XR. And so that's an important use case on both the VR and mixed reality front, according to our US survey on the commercial side. And then also on commercial side, just want to stress that most users are actually doing it in 2D. They're not doing the headsets. The darker blue line here is showing the share of enterprises that were doing augmented reality, but with a tablet. Their use case was tablet and smartphones, not putting on the headset. Now that's supposed to go up to maybe 25% of the total, so it's growing, but we should be thinking about AR as something that's done, more or less on the flat screen devices of today, and that's an important aspect of it. So there's some color by sector. I won't go through it all, but basically they're also looking at collaboration and meetings and things like that. In the public sector, the Marines are training on one of their amphibious landing vehicles using XR headsets. Boeing's developing satellites in XR, because if these things cost billions of dollars potentially and you can't get it back, you better get it right, and therefore investing in XR is a very cheap way to double check that you're doing things right. So that's pretty much it. I guess I'm out of time. I will skip the summary, but yeah, I'm happy to answer some questions, but the one point I would leave you with is if this has inspired you in any way to get involved in XR, to think about use cases that you or your generation may be interested in, well, please do so. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and a lot of things are going to change, and it's probably your generations that's going to be doing this more than mine. So thank you. Questions? Please.
So I'm very interested in business. Do you think it would be cheaper for businesses to do like meetings and like all their stuff online rather than have to like pay to put the lights on and bring everybody into their company?
That was kind of the point. I kind of ran out of time at the end there, but there were some use cases where doing virtual collaboration or doing training or meetings, some sectors were much higher than others. So in some cases it doesn't make sense, but some of them were over 50%. So a lot of the use cases were 30, 40%, but in some sectors, the respondents we got at least, they were well over 50% for doing exactly that. And again, it's not gonna be as good as doing it in person, but if you can get half as good for 10% of the cost, there's gonna be a group of organizations and individuals that are gonna view that as a superior way of doing things, just to save time and money. Sometimes it's just not practical. Anybody else? That good, huh? Okay.
So my question is regarding the disruption that you were talking about at the very end. We've seen how smartphones has disrupted the telecommunications industry over the years. How do you see the role of smartphones going forward, given how we're now consuming all of these devices and the way we are communicating with each other, but also in the virtual reality that we're talking about?
Right, so good question. So I think it has to be concerning for companies like Apple or Samsung or anybody else who's making, and their business is largely derived, if not majority derived, from smartphones and everything related to it. If a small startup can create a device with an ER headset and the UI is decent and you can access the main apps you want to, and it's roughly the same cost, what percentage of them are going to churn off of buying it from Apple or Samsung or whatever? So, and if you pair that with the idea of changing up how marketing works, right? Marketing and sales, this is again where I think Meta wants to deal themselves, or at least they want to deal themselves back into smartphones, let's put it that way. But they also want to disrupt advertising. So what they're really investing in, why they're spending billions of dollars, and Google is too, and some of the other big tech players, I would argue, is they're looking at that advertising and marketing and sales stuff, and they're like, if we get in early and this does take off, that could be very disruptive for major parts of the digital ecosystem, because those are, if you get in early and you become the leader there. Again, there was like $680 billion spent last year on digital advertising alone. You just need a few percent of that, and your red line goes back to black.
Right.
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
I don't think so. We're good? Okay, thank you.